In today's video, we're going to look at 17-year-old Irina Krush against 13-year-old Hikaru Nakamura. These players were pretty evenly matched, both rated around 2,400. Irina Krush has now become the U.S. Women's Champion 8 times, and Hikaru the U.S. Champion 5 times. So in this game, we're going to see multiple sacrifices, a kingside attack, triple connected passed pawns, and we get this dynamic of Irina being a positional player and Hikaru being a tactical player. So let's see how this one plays out. We see knight f3, knight f6, c4, g6, and this is going to transpose into a King's Indian defense. And this is one of the specialties of Hikaru Nakamura when he was growing up. Now we'll kind of fast forward a little bit to the middle game. We get sort of this standard King's Indian structure. And after queen e8, we're on move 9, this line was actually played in Carlsen with white against Nakamura as black, just back in September 2023 on a chess.com event. Now we see d takes e5, d takes e5. So let's take stock of the imbalances here. We do have this fianchetto for Hikaru, whereas Irina does not have either bishop fianchettoed, and Irina has this pawn up on c4. So those are the two big differences. Now, when you want to evaluate this position though, think about which pieces are more valuable than their counterparts. The bishop on g7 is not a very good piece because he runs into this pawn on e5. The bishop is stuck playing defense. So Irina already has around a 0.7 stockfish advantage here. The plan now for white is to push these queenside pawns. Expand queenside because she already has the pawn on c4, and Hikaru's bishop stuck hitting this pawn instead of being on this diagonal where he would point to the queenside. h3, kicking the knight, retreats. Now pawn to a3. Rook to e1 was actually the top move. This move takes us out of book theory, and Hikaru finds the best response, knight c5. That's the reason rook e1 was better, to put an extra defender on this e-pawn. So Hikaru correctly double attacks the pawn. Queen c2 to defend. Knight back to e6. Hikaru is playing well here and has pretty much fought back to equality in this position, and he's threatening to gain the bishop pair with knight takes g5. So that would leave him with 2 bishops, and Irina would only have 1. Pawn to c5. Now, Irina is known for kind of methodical play and a strategic approach to the game, but here she is giving up the bishop pair. And what I think she wants to do here is she wants to play towards the endgame. She knows Hikaru is younger than her. She knows he's very strong tactically. She's playing for an endgame advantage right now. Knight takes g5. Hikaru, known for the sharp and aggressive play, is going to hope that these bishops come to life later on to create tactics, and he does have a slight stockfish advantage now. Knight takes back. Queen e7, hitting this pawn. Pawn to b4. And Irina's plan is pretty simple. She wants to keep expanding these pawns on the queen side. Knight to h5 by Hikaru, opening up the attack on the knight, potentially coming to f4. We already see that bishop hitting h3. He's got a kingside attack on his mind. Knight back to f3, and there he goes, knight to f4, targeting these pawns with both his knight and the bishop on c8. Rook to d1, pawn to c6, guarding this hole on d5. Irina might be looking at a knight hop there if he doesn't play it. Rook to d6, an interesting idea by Irina. What she wants to do is control the d file by doubling her rooks on the open file. So whenever you see an open file, your default should be, let's control the file. That's the first thing you want to do in a position with an open file like this. Irina, strong positional player. That's exactly what she does here. Knight back to e6. The bishop may want to head to d4. The knight, might want to head to d4. It's backed up by the bishop and the pawn. Bishop to c4. And if Irina can secure rook to d1 and queen to d2, and maybe knight back to e2, she pretty much has the optimal position, because the knight on e2 guards the f4 and the d4 squares, and that's where this knight would love to head to. So Irina has this very straightforward plan, but it takes 3-4 moves. Let's see if Hikaru can stop it, and he does with a great move, knight to d4, before Irina could play knight back to e2. Queen to d1, pawn to b5 by Hikaru, and Irina cannot capture en passant because it would drop the rook on d6. And at this point, bishop to d3 is the top move, but it's sort of hard to figure out why. The idea with bishop to d3 is white could take on d4, And after the pawn takes, figure out what to do with the knight, but then eventually play f4. And this bishop sitting on d3 points at black's kingside. So that's the strongest move. Irina played bishop to f1. This is sort of like the grandmaster move. Grandmasters always tuck their bishops on f1 next to the king. Bishop e6, knight takes, pawn takes, knight e2. Now here we have a pretty interesting moment. Knight takes d4. If that could be played safely, I think white has a pretty big advantage here already. So the strongest move for black is rook f to d8, threatening to win a pawn here. And if white were to take, black takes back, that rook helps defend this pawn. But Hikaru makes a mistake. He plays bishop to e5, hitting the rook. And at first glance, it looks like that's a pretty strong move because the rook doesn't have any great looking squares. If it takes on c6, there's actually a huge tactical shot, pawn to d3, hitting the knight and the rook in the corner. So Irina really can't move the rook. But if you want to pause the video, go ahead and try to find the brilliant move played by Irina. The move she played is knight takes d4. And she says, you can have the exchange if you want it. I'm perfectly fine sacking the rook. At this moment, Hikaru, if he does play bishop takes d6, he actually falls for knight takes c6, queen moves, and then queen takes d6. Pretty big advantage for white. So he doesn't fall for that. Instead, he goes bishop back to d7, the best move on the board. And now Irina finds another really strong move. She plays knight back to b3, threatening to take the bishop. And again, she says, go ahead, take my rook. I don't care. And taking the rook does give Irina a slight advantage again after pawn takes back, and then this knight is going to park on the c5 square with a really bad bishop for black. Rook a to d8 played, rook to a2, and now finally Hikaru takes the rook, and it's the best moment to do it out of the moves we've seen so far. C takes back on d6, and at this point Hikaru does not play the top move on the board. The top move is queen takes e4, and I think the reason he didn't play this, I'm sure he saw it and calculated this out. He was probably afraid of knight c5, retreating the queen, and then rook to d2. Because if you look at this resulting position, that's a dominant knight sitting there on c5, tying down that bishop. The rooks aren't looking that great. Hikaru probably didn't want to play defense, and Irina does still have this really strong pawn on d6. So instead, he plays queen to g5. And he might have also been thinking, hey, I'm going for bishop takes h3. Your g-pawn is pinned by my queen, and I'm going to just attack your king. So he might have figured this is the bigger attack, and he wanted to play aggressive. Knight to c5. Irina simply ignores the threat of bishop takes h3. Another strong move. Hikaru takes. And now here, Irina plays queen to d4. Queen to d2 is actually the top move, offering the queen trade, which does give Irina a clear advantage. So I'm a little surprised that she didn't go for that queen trade. Instead, she plays queen to d4. And this is another tactical moment where if you want to pause the video, go ahead, try to find the top move for Hikaru. What Hikaru played was bishop to e6. Not a bad move. It's the second best move, but it does still keep a clear advantage for Irina. What he should have played, and if you found this, congrats, bishop takes g2. Brilliancy. After bishop takes back, Hikaru is able to secure a draw with perpetual check. The queen is going to check on one of these squares no matter what white does. Now, I don't know if Hikaru just didn't want the draw. Maybe he thought he could do better, but Irina still has the advantage after the move played in the game, bishop to e6. Rook to d2 by Irina. She is ready to start getting the pawns rolling in the middle. She would love to push the f, e, and d pawns together. h5, young Hikaru style. He's going ultra aggressive, pushing that h pawn up the board, and he's trying to attack the king. Pawn to e5 by Irina. Bishop to d5. Look at what Hikaru is doing. Double attack on the g2 pawn. Currently guarded by the bishop on f1, but this h pawn is still coming up the board. This could get scary for white. Pawn to f4. Irina slugs back with the pawn, attacking the queen. Top move in the position. Queen g4. Now bishop takes b5 by Irina, and if the pawn takes back, the bishop on d5 drops. So nice little tactic to gain a point back in material, but if we look up top here, Hikaru is still +1 on the material scoreboard. h4, top move by Hikaru. H-pawn is really trying to cause some problems for Irina by coming up to h3. Bishop c4 played. h3. Triple attack on this pawn, and now Irina plays knight to e4, cutting off the bishop from attacking g2. Note that the rook still guards g2, so there's no checkmate. And this knight is heading to f6, where it checks the king and attacks the queen at the same time. Super strong square. This is another moment to pause the video if you would like. Try to find the best move for black. Hikaru blunders here. The move Hikaru played in the game was pawn to h2 check. So we'll come back to that. It's better, though, to leave the pawn on h3, and we're going to see why. You want this pawn on h3 to keep pressure on g2. You want that flexibility so that queen takes g2 is always a threat. That means the top move for Hikaru is to simply take the knight right away. After queen takes back, just improve this rook. This holds white to only a slight advantage, and if Irina plays, for example, rook to d3, which is a blunder, there's this beautiful tactic. Rook takes e5 because this queen is stuck to the defensive g2, and the pawn on f4 is pinned to the queen, so there's no pawn takes rook, and there's no queen takes rook. This is already winning for black. So that would have been the best idea. Bishop takes e4 in this position, but instead Hikaru goes h2 check. Tempting looking move, and Irina simply sidesteps, which is the top move, uses this pawn kind of as a shield, and now there's no pressure at all on the g2 pawn. Queen takes g2 is never really going to happen. Bishop takes, queen takes, and that lack of counterplay on g2 makes the difference. So now Hikaru needs to drum up some new counterplay. King g7, queen d4, lining up with the king. Pawn to c5, trying to distract the queen. Pawn takes pawn. Rook to b8. So Hikaru is finding a way to try to get his rook into the game. It's a good idea. Look at this move by Irina. Bishop to a2, guarding the b1 square. Solid move, and she still threatens pawn to e6 with the discovered check. Queen g3, eyeing this square. She starts with pawn to e6 with the discovered check. Hikaru blocks, pawn to f6, and now we see the triple connected pass pawns. I've never seen this in a game, except maybe like when one side won't resign in an online blitz game and the other side just keeps pushing all their pawns after capturing all the opponent's pieces. But to have this happen in a game that matters more, super rare, triple connected pass pawns. Now we see rook to d1 by Irina. Another solid option, just guarding the back rank so there's no queen to e1 check. Because the idea for Hikaru was queen e1 followed by rook to h8 with a checkmate while the king sits on h2. Queen g4, pawn to e7 hitting the rook to h8, pawn to d7, and wow, Irina is crushing Hikaru. Rook to b2, a Hikaru double attack on the g2 pawn, bishop to d5 to defend, another strong move. And keep an eye on this play by Irina because this is something we can all learn from. When you have a strong attack and your opponent's fighting for counterplay, always weigh their counterplay moves with your attacking moves. So Irina's doing a great job saying, okay, I know I'm beating you in this position, but I'm going to make sure that you don't have any scary moves in return while I'm attacking you and converting this win. Rook h to b8. e8 equals queen, and now we're at a point where it's mate and 7 with best play. Rook to b1. And at this moment, there is a checkmate in 2. In the game, Irina played queen to e1 and Hikaru resigned. But the mate in 2 is queen takes f6 check. And after the king takes back, queen to f7 checkmate. So Hikaru resigned, though, after queen coming back to e1. This was a super strong prophylactic and positional game by Irina Krush. If you want to see more of Irina's games, let me know in the comments. Please subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and we will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, guys.